to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, Predictive Index, and personal experience, your host, Traci Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Multiple competing priorities. That is what we are chatting about today on the Talent Optimization Podcast. My name is Traci Shirk, and I am the Chief Talent Officer here at Elevated Talent Consulting. And multiple competing priorities. Why are these important? How do they show up in your day-to-day work? And what the heck does it look like? More importantly, there are times where we as leaders and as employees get super frustrated with, hey, being asked to do one thing here and then being asked to do something else from another individual inside of our organization. And as we chat this month about how do we inspire our employees to perform and what specifically does that look like, this is something that we really want to spend some time on and dig into. Because as you will see as we go through this month's content is we are, on this theme of inspiring employees to perform. So how we make and manage an agreement will be next week. We're going to look at how we define the specific roles and how individuals can truly step into those roles and know what winning looks like. We will also then chat about individuals really knowing kind of what pay, compensation, and where they're specifically at in the organization and how that allows them to stop worrying about, the hierarchical or the structural items and really start focusing on here's what I'm here to do, the why of the organization. So that's a little teaser for where we are going this month on the show. So back to looking at multiple competing priorities. What are they and why are they important? So I had a leader sit me down. This was probably about 8 years ago. And, what she said to me was, she goes, Traci, you have a very specific need from where you sit in human resources. And you have a need to look out for the company from a compliance standpoint and specifically to ensure that you know what's happening within the departments to bring them the right people at the right time. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And, as we were chatting through that, she's like, but your department leaders have a very different priority. Their priority is making sure that the work product gets out the door. Their priority is ensuring that they're hitting what their numbers are. Their priority is ensuring that they are meeting what their goals are based on what my expectations are of them. And so as we chatted through this, it became very, very clear that the priorities I had were very different from the priorities of the individual that was leading those teams. Now, are there intersections between these priorities? Absolutely. But what becomes really important is that we need to sometimes take a step back and say, from where I sit and what I see, what are my most important needs? And based on the individuals that I need to work with on my team to accomplish the overall goal that we're all aiming for, what are those priorities they have? And where's the intersection of that? And where does that specifically not align? And when we can have those conversations, what we were able to really see is that we were able to dig pretty deeply into asking some of those key questions and getting to understanding why and how individuals were making the decisions that they were making. And what happened is all the drama that was around that started to fall away because we were able to get to a very specific understanding. Now, I make this sound so simple, right? And it's not. And it's especially not when we are specifically in the middle of it, right? And so one of the things that we want to have you walk away from today's podcast is really one, knowing what is a multiple competing priority. And this is where, again, when you look at a 360-degree view and where each person is sitting in the organization, what is important to them at that point in time. And then finding out, okay, so for our executive, guess what? They're going to be most concerned about bringing sales in, hitting their numbers, meeting what the expectations of the board are, right? When we look from an HR perspective, typically we're looking at it from a compliance standpoint, from a how do we retain our staff standpoint. If we look at it from an operational perspective, we're going back to what are the numbers? Are we hitting what the client's needs are? Are we aligned with the mission and the values specifically? And if we look at it from an employee point of view, it's let me get in, do my job, not have a ton of drama going on and get the heck out of here, right? So those are just a couple examples. Now, when we look at all those, is there lots of room for potential items to come forward that are disagreements? The answer is absolutely. And the question I want you to ask yourself is this a good thing? And we believe that this is a fantastic thing. And the reason why is if we are only looking at a problem and a solution through one lens, we're going to be missing so many opportunities, and we're going to be missing so many ways that we can elevate inside of our organization, both from a personal and a professional level, and deliver a highest level value to our clients. So that is what a multiple competing priority is and why they are gold. And I think something here that's so important for individuals kind of listening in is if we think that these are negative, they're going to show up negative. And if we think that these are positives, then guess what? They're going to show up as positive things. And we believe that these multiple competing priorities are definitely positive items. And when we dig into this with staff, especially line staff, it's really asking them, what is most important to you about this XYZ thing? So it could be, hey, what is most important to you based on how the line is set up right now? What is most important to you on how you are executing this item, right? So we had a conversation the other day with an individual on our team, and he actually produces our podcast. And as we were chatting about, producing the podcast, Quatley was very, very invested in the highest quality possible for our podcast, which I so appreciate, right? However, the time that he was spending on that was more than what was allocated from a budget standpoint and from a time standpoint in order for us to get all the things done that we needed to get done inside the organization. So again, we had multiple competing priorities. Quatley was looking at it from, I want to make the best product ever. And I was looking at it from, this is a 20-minute podcast. We don't need to be spending, 6-8 hours on it. We can do this in an hour, 2 hours with all of the other items that are there. So what we ended up doing is we ended up having a really constructive conversation about, tell me a little bit about why you think you need to take that much time. What does that look like? What is your fear if we were to say you only had X amount of time in order to do this? And then it's also level setting expectations to say, okay, so here's the quality of the podcast that we've had up until now, and it's been fine. And here's the quality that we want going forward. So can we do a little bit of an improvement in quality versus a huge leap in quality based on where we're at, right? And so with that, that was one way that we were really able to kind of step-by-step walk through what's important to him. What is important to me? How do we, share that understanding and appreciate where an individual is coming from? And as we talk about culture and truly inspiring individuals to perform, if we send a message that quality isn't important, is that individual going to be engaged in the work at the same level after the conversation? The answer is no, right? So really digging in and saying, hey, here's what's important, here's why. Here's what's important, here's why. What's important to you and why? Okay, what agreements can we come to based on these multiple competing priorities. And what we were able to do is come up with a great compromise where he walked away feeling that it was a win. I walked away feeling like it was a win. So we both got what we needed. And we also created a little bit of runway for him to get to where he needed to go with shaving off time over time. And so as you think about that example, I really want you to think about what are some examples inside of your organization where these items come up. I give another example. And that is, we were working with some individuals that had a safety leader, that safety was the most important thing. But when we are 100% safe all the time and kind of living into very rigid standards of safety, what happens is we start to terminate people or alienate individuals. When do we really need that level and that high of a standard? One of the podcasts I love to listen to is Mike Rowe, and he talks about safety third versus safety first. And yes, I may be chastised for this as an HR professional talking about this, but it's really looking at what are the multiple competing priorities and how do we look at that and say, okay, up to this level is where we need to be. Above that's great, but what are we sacrificing by getting everything to 100% every single time? So the other thing that I want to look at with multiple competing priorities and kind of that level of perfection that we tend to have is want to take a step back and look at what are our natural behavioral styles. So as many of our listeners know, we are a certified Predictive Index partner. And with that, we love PI because it really helps to explain how individuals tick, why they are the way they are. And if you have not taken the Predictive Index yet, we will have the link in the show notes for you. So with PI, there are individuals who are very, very precise, and a deadline is a deadline and perfection is fantastic, right? And then there's other individuals like myself where bullet points are great and deadlines are negotiable. So with that being said, knowing who is on your team, what your natural behavioral drives are, and who you're talking with and what their natural behavioral drives are. So for example, I mentioned Quatley earlier. Well, Quatley's highest drive is his, drive for that detail orientation and that precision, right? Guess what my lowest drive is, that lack sometimes of that detail orientation and that precision because I'm good with bullet points and I'm good with ambiguity. So knowing me as a leader, that is a lot of times how I operate. I have to be very cognizant of how am I going to inspire Quatley based on the role that he is in and based on knowing what his natural strength is, which is detail orientation. And I don't want to squash that because I need that on our team in order for our team and our organization to be incredibly, incredibly successful. So as we kind of recap this, here's 3 really important things I want you to take from our podcast today as some key takeaways. Multiple competing priorities are gold because what they do is they allow us as an organization to see a 360-degree view of what's going on within that decision so that we can make the best decision for the organization and where each person is currently sitting. The second thing that's really important within this is, naming and having the conversation with individuals about what's important to you and why, and here's what's important to me. So when we have the understanding and we slow ourselves down enough to be transparent in our communication, guess what? We build trust, and that trust is key for success. And then the third is to pay really close attention to what are the natural behavioral drives of the individuals that you're working with. And is the multiple competing priorities really based on what's specifically happening in the context of the organization and the decision, or it's a both? Is it a distinction between the natural behavioral drives of the individuals? And guess what? If you do this right, those 2 things are aligned, the job and the person, right? because what we know is that the job and the person are two sides of the same coin. So typically that will also be the case here. So those are our three takeaways. So as we kind of look through that, I just wanted to point that out. So as you know, I always bring in a source. So my source today, there's lots of them actually. There's a lot of sources from Predictive Index that have kind of been built in this. But Rolling Stones had a great article on multiple competing priorities, and we'll also link that in the show notes. And with multiple competing priorities that Rolling Stones was talking about was really for line level individuals. And they had 12 steps here. And I think that this is really great because instead of talking about, hey, multiple competing priorities between two different people to make a decision, we sometimes forget that we and our staff have 700 priorities that are on our task list for the day. So how do we decide what to do first, second, and third? So here are their 12. And I love this because it really kind of takes a checklist into what we just talked about, which is multiple competing priorities and decision-making into multiple competing priorities. And what do we do based on what's on our plate, right? And so delegate operational tasks. So if there's something that you can delegate off of your plate to someone else and you are in a position to do that, that's something great to do. You want to identify what is taking up the most space in your head, right? I love this one because guess what? We tend to take and procrastinate the things that we don't know how to do. What does that do? That actually sucks up so much more time versus allowing us to really dig into and get that thing done so that we can move very quickly through the rest of what's on our list. So it's kind of like, the book that is, eat the frog first, right? Like, let's go do that thing that we think is hard that we're procrastinating first so that we can go do the other things later on. How does the task relate to to the importance of my job and those values, right? What is the impact of getting this task done? What matters the most right now? What elevates our customer experience? How long will each of these take to complete? And is there a way that we can shift that around so we can quickly get 5 or 6 things done in 20 minutes? And feel very accomplished with that, knowing, hey, I'm going to have some dedicated time a little bit later to get some of these other things done. So those were some of the items off of there. And again, multiple competing priorities can be looked at in 2 lenses. The decisions that we are making, A, and then B, hey, what's on our task list and how do we choose what to do first? And we will chat more about timekeeping and how to organize your calendar later on this year on our podcast. So with that, I want to, start to land our plane, so to say, today. And one of those takeaways that we have for the executives listening in is to really have transparency to your staff and HR about why something is important and creating the space for the other person to name what's important to them and why. What that does is that allows us to see that we actually have 2 different competing priorities and then we can come together on what those outcomes are. And for HR listeners, today, I really want you to name what winning looks like. When you can name what winning looks like, a lot of times we can, kind of cut past, the operational or the tasky things that we're doing and really get to the transformational pieces of HR. So, because when you know what winning looks like and name what you believe that is for you, you're level setting and you're getting in alignment with the executives and the leaders on your team so that you know that you can succeed. So, with that being said, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. And with that, we have an amazing program that is just launching right now, and it is called our Inspire program. So if you're curious about, hey, how do I inspire my people to perform? Who do I need to be as an HR leader? Or if you're an executive listening in today and you're going, oh my goodness, the HR leaders or whoever drew the short stick, that we kind of threw HR on their desk and they were just kind of the one chosen for it. in our organization, they really need some support and a partner to help them create, a real true HR plan inside of the organization to inspire our employees to perform, to take them through our talent pathway planning, and to ensure that we have the documentation and the performance management system for our staff to succeed. So if that is interesting to you, we do have that Inspire program available. So with that, thank you so much for being with us today, and we will see you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.